Welcome to the hidden mystery beneath Mexico City. While you wait for the next train, I invite you to disconnect from the outside world and immerse yourself in the stories few dare to tell. The Metro Collective Transportation System is more than just a means of transport. It's a labyrinth of energies, memories, and secrets. With millions of daily users, its tunnels and stations have witnessed more than we can imagine. Tragedies, disappearances, and inexplicable phenomena. From Capilco to Tlatelolco, every corner holds a story, an echo of those who never left or left a part of themselves in these dark depths. Are you ready to discover what truly happens when the lights flicker and the last train departs? Story 1. I will tell you a story that still gives me chills. The following tale happened on Line 3 of the Mexico City Metro, one of the busiest lines and, as some say, the one most filled with strange energies. This is the experience of Carolina Rivera, who one night lived through something that marked her forever. It was a Sunday night. Carolina had had a long and exhausting day at the office. Audits had kept her and her team busy late into the night, so that day she couldn't leave until after 10 o'clock. Tired and eager to get home, she headed to Hospital General Station, where she would take the metro to return home. The station was deserted, the air cold, and the echo of her footsteps reverberated through the empty hallways. That didn't surprise her. After all, it was one of the last hours of service. She stepped onto the platform and waited for the next train. When it arrived, she noticed it was completely empty, which was strange in such a busy city as Mexico City. But it wasn't the first time she had taken the metro late, so she didn't give it much thought. She entered and sat in one of the middle seats, leaving her bag next to her. Finally relaxing after an endless day, the train started moving, advancing with its characteristic clattering over the rails. And Carolina closed her eyes for a moment. Not even 2 stations had passed when she started to notice something odd. Although she was alone in the carriage, she felt a presence, that uncomfortable sensation of being watched. She opened her eyes abruptly and tensed up. At the end of the carriage, barely illuminated by the flickering lights of the metro, a figure was seated. It was an older woman, dressed entirely in black, with a headscarf covering her hair and a hunched posture. Carolina didn't recall seeing her when she got on, and that sent a chill down her spine. The woman remained motionless, staring at the floor. Although her face wasn't visible, Carolina couldn't take her eyes off her. How was it possible she hadn't noticed her before? When had she boarded? She tried to shake off the unease, thinking perhaps the exhaustion was playing tricks on her. She adjusted herself in her seat and decided to ignore the woman, fixing her gaze on the door of the carriage. The stations continued to pass, but the tension in the air grew more palpable with each one. As the train moved, the lights in the carriage began flickering more frequently, and the clattering of the rails seemed to resonate louder, more deeply. Carolina couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With every flicker of the lights, her eyes drifted back to the figure of the woman at the end, but she didn't move, as if she didn't belong there, as if she were out of time. Finally, just a few stations away from her destination at Capilco, Carolina stood up to prepare to disembark. It was then that she saw her move. The woman in black rose from her seat in an unnatural way, not like someone who pushes off their legs to stand, but as if she simply floated upwards. That made Carolina's heart race. She stared at the figure, and that's when she noticed the woman had no feet. She was floating gently, not touching the floor, as if suspended in the air. Carolina felt panic start to creep into her body. She gripped the seat tightly, paralyzed by fear. She wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. The woman, without feet and with an erect posture that seemed to defy the laws of nature, began walking, or rather gliding, toward the door of the carriage. Carolina followed her with her gaze, each second more terrified, until the woman stopped right in front of the doors that were about to open. The metro doors slid open slowly, emitting that metallic sound Carolina had heard thousands of times before, but in that moment, it felt like the prelude to something far worse. The woman slowly turned her head towards her, and for the first time, Carolina saw her face. It was an elderly woman, but not just any elderly woman. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with deep wrinkles that marked her face like cracks in ancient marble. But what really chilled Carolina to the bone was her smile. A distorted smile that didn't convey joy, but mockery. Her lips curled in an unnatural way, as if someone had carved that expression into her face. Her eyes, sunken into her skull, stared directly at Carolina. Carolina felt her entire body tense, unable to move, as the woman in black watched her. The air in the carriage grew heavy, as if a malevolent presence had settled in the atmosphere. Then, without warning, the woman left the carriage, but not like a normal person. No, she floated along the platform, like a shadow that didn't belong to this world, gliding through the air until she disappeared completely from Carolina's view. The doors of the carriage closed with a loud thud, and the metro continued its journey. Carolina remained paralyzed in her seat, her breath shallow and her heart racing. What had she just seen? Had it been real? With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and called her boyfriend, sobbing as she recounted what she had just witnessed. He tried to calm her down, telling her he would wait for her at Universidad Station, the next one, so she wouldn't have to get off alone at Capilco. From that night onward, Carolina avoided taking the metro at that station. For months, she preferred to get off before or after Capilco, especially when the carriage was empty or late at night. The fear of seeing that floating woman again stayed with her for a long time. And now, I ask you, what would you have done in her place? Would you have stood up to follow that woman, to see where she was going or what she wanted? Would you have dared to return her smile, even out of pure nervousness? Or would you have remained petrified in your seat, like Carolina did? Sometimes, what we see in those empty metro carriages can be more than just an illusion. And would you be ready to face it? Story 2. We remain on Line 3 of the Mexico City Metro, but this time we'll delve even deeper into its dark tunnels, where light seems barely to reach, and the echo of wheels on the rails creates an unsettling symphony. The next stop is between La Raza and Tlatelolco, a stretch where the train seems to lose itself in the darkness, and where more than one passenger has felt they weren't alone, even though the lights tell a different story. This time, I'll tell you the story of Rosa Alvarez, who one night lived through one of the most chilling moments of her life while heading home. What should have been a calm and routine trip turned into an experience that made her question what kinds of presences lurked in the depths of the city's metro. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and Rosa had just left her parents' house after a family dinner. It was around 10 at night, and although the metro wasn't as full as it is during rush hour, there were still some passengers on the platform at La Raza. Rosa said goodbye to her parents and headed for the train, noticing that most of the seats were empty that night, which didn't bother her in the least. In fact, she enjoyed traveling without the usual daytime crowds. She sat in one of the seats near the door, towards the back of the train, and took out her phone to check some messages as the metro began its journey. Everything seemed normal. The clattering of the train and the gentle swaying of the metro felt familiar, almost comforting. The journey between La Raza and Tlatelolco had always been somewhat uncomfortable for her due to the length of the tunnel that connects the two stations. It was a long and dark stretch where the train's lights often flickered, sometimes creating a nearly claustrophobic atmosphere. But Rosa had never had a reason to feel real fear until that night. Only a few minutes had passed since the train left La Raza when Rosa noticed something strange. In one of the flickers of the lights, she saw a man sitting a few seats away, in the middle of the train. At first, she didn't pay him much attention, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. The man was unusually pale, wearing a short-brimmed black hat and a suit that looked like it belonged to another era. He didn't seem to fit with the atmosphere of a Tuesday night in the metro. His deeply dark eyes were fixed on her unblinking, as if he had been watching her since she boarded the train. Rosa tried to ignore him, thinking maybe he was just another strange passenger, someone odd but not dangerous. However, the man's gaze was so piercing that she couldn't help but feel watched, almost invaded. The silence in the train, combined with the constant flickering of the lights, was starting to make her more and more nervous. The man still hadn't moved, just watching her. And the more she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, the stranger he seemed. There was something wrong with him. The train lights flickered again, but this time, when they came back on, the man had changed his posture. Now! He was sitting more upright, with his hands resting on his knees, but his eyes remained locked on her. A chill ran down Rosa's spine. Something wasn't right. How could he have adopted such a different posture in such a short time, without her noticing? The air was growing heavier, more oppressive with every second that passed. As the train entered the tunnel, the lights began to flicker more frequently, and the man's face seemed to blur between the flashes of light and darkness. At one point, during one of those flickers, Rosa could have sworn she saw the man smile slightly, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was one that seemed to mock her growing fear. Rosa's breathing quickened. She wanted to look away, but something compelled her to keep watching him, as if at any moment the man might do something even stranger. Each flicker of the train's lights made the atmosphere more surreal, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. With each passing moment, the man seemed closer, as if the distance between them was shrinking with every flash of light. And then the unexpected happened. The train's lights went out completely, plunging the space into absolute darkness. It was only for a couple of seconds, but for Rosa, it felt like an eternity. The metro continued its journey through the tunnel, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heart pounding. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. Rosa remained frozen in her seat, staring at the spot where the man had been sitting. There was no trace of him. He couldn't have gotten off, since they were still in the tunnel, and the doors hadn't opened. There was no way he could have just vanished. She looked around, searching for some sign that what she had seen was real, but there was no one else in the carriage. The rest of the journey to Tlatelolco was a mix of fear and confusion. Rosa couldn't understand what had happened. Had it been her imagination? Had she been daydreaming? But what terrified her the most was a persistent feeling that the man was still there, watching her from somewhere out of sight. When the metro finally arrived at Tlatelolco, Rosa hurriedly disembarked, her heart still racing. She didn't stop until she reached the street, where the cool night air made her feel somewhat safer, although the image of the man in the black hat remained etched in her mind. Rosa never took the metro at that hour again, and for a long time avoided the stretch between La Raza and Tlatelolco. However, she wasn't the only one who had strange encounters in that tunnel. Other passengers have reported sightings of a similar figure, a man in a suit and hat, whose eyes seemed to pierce through you, as if he could see something beyond your flesh and bones. And now I ask you, what would you do if you encountered someone like that in the middle of a tunnel where there's no escape? Would you confront him, or stay in your seat, waiting for him to disappear in the next flicker of the lights? Sometimes, the metro's tunnels hide more than just tracks. They hide secrets that perhaps should never have come to light. These stories are just a small glimpse of the many unsettling experiences hidden in the tunnels of the Mexico City Metro. Perhaps the next time you find yourself alone in a train car or feel a gaze fixed on you, you'll wonder if you're really alone, or if there's something more, something our eyes can't quite see. The energies that flow through this transit system seem to get trapped, manifesting themselves at the most unexpected moments. Remember, the last one to leave, turn off the lights and close the mausoleum doors. Good night.